I think most of the people here have read the Janus cycle. Yeah. Out of the 8 characters who narrated the Janus cycle, most of them make a return in this book, but it's an indirect sequel. It's quite possible to read it without reading the first one, but it's probably a bit more rewarding to read it in order. And it's got the same sort of format. It's 8 chapters narrated by 8 different characters again, but some of the narrators are the same as the first book, but quite a lot of them are secondary characters from the first book who I decided to sort of bring into the foreground and give them their own stories. And I'm going to read you just a few pages from the first part of the second chapter, which is narrated by a character called Jack, who some of you might remember. He was the guitarist in a band in the first book. He's in chapters 6 and 8, I believe, but this one he's turned into narrator. I'll read the first 3 pages of this story because it's one of the ones that doesn't have too many spoilers in it. This chapter's called Roots. Occasionally in life, you'll cross paths with a person who is in need of help. It is not always as visceral and obvious as hearing cries of pain or noticing in someone's emaciated face that they are ill or malnourished. Woes are not always physical or loud. Sometimes people need help for reasons which are subtle, and just because they don't need an ambulance, food, or shelter doesn't mean that they don't need another human being to enter their sphere, to intervene. You feel something in the air. It is almost as if they are emitting a distress call. They probably are in a way. All the incredible discoveries humankind have made about the universe, and yet we still can't fully explain how schools of fish are able to swim in perfect unison, or how the monarch butterfly knows when it's time to begin the long journey back to the very same tree that their ancestor hibernated in last winter. Maybe it is that same mysterious force which tugs upon us sometimes, triggers something within you and puts your life to a halt. You drop whatever it was you were doing or on your way to, and instinct takes over. Such was the case when I encountered Tilly that evening. When I found her, she was sitting on a bench. The lamplight was dim. It was definitely the wrong sort of place for a girl her age to be alone. I could see her face. It was obscured by strands of her black hair, and the rest by her hands, as if she was trying to shut out the world, but I recognised that coat she was wearing. On almost every occasion I had met her in the past, she had donned that tattered old thing, and those boots too. She was the very image of lost youth. "Tilly?" I asked. She jolted in surprise at the sound of her name, like a small creature caught somewhere they're not supposed to be. There was a measure of relief in her eyes when she saw that it was only me, but it swiftly transitioned to embarrassment. Her face turned red. "It's me, Jack," I said. "You remember me, don't you?" She nodded and then pretended to smile, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I mean, you look—" I hesitated. I didn't even know this girl all that well. "Do you have somewhere else to go?" I finished. "Faye was supposed to meet me," she said, "but she didn't turn up and I—" Her voice trailed off and the name she uttered lingered awkwardly in the space between us. The fact that we both knew Faye had recently become a rather barren connection. I never found out why Faye and Ellen had fallen out. It was all very strange. "Do you want me to walk you home?" I offered. "No," Tilly shook her head. "I can't. My grandmother. She would kill me if she found out I was out this late. I never knew Tilly lived with her grandmother. It raised a few questions, but I didn't pry. Rarely is there a pleasant story behind it when a teenager lives with their grandmother. "You can stay at mine if you like," I said. "I have a couch and a sleeping bag somewhere." "Well, I think I do anyway." I scratched my head. "It's no trouble." She smiled. "So this is your home," she said as I lit a candle. I could tell she was trying to be very hard to be polite. The expression on her face, however, betrayed her as she cast her eyes across my ramshackle abode. "It's not much to talk about. It's technically not even mine. I'm one of those dirty squatters you hear about. The house is one of the many abandoned hovels which make up the neighbourhood, affectionately referred to by locals as Yesterville. The water still runs, but there is no electricity, hence the candlelight." "I know it's a dump," I said as I flung my hat across the room. It landed on a pile of clothes. "But it's free." "It suits you," Tilly said. It was true, I guess. The image conjured in your mind when you found out I'm a squatter is probably not a far cry from the mark. I'm a gangly young man with tangled, mousy brown hair. That day I was wearing a stripy green tunic made from hemp and baggy corduroy trousers. Pretty standard affair for me. You can go back to that lovely bench if this isn't good enough for you, you know, I reminded her. She giggled and put a hand to her mouth. I'm teasing you, Jack, she said. I actually quite like it. Just then we both heard a scuffling and turned our eyes to the window. What's that? Tilly asked, her jaw dropping as something small and fluffy leapt from the window pane and landed on my elbow. This is Nuttles, I said. He scurried up my shoulder and greeted me by nuzzling my cheek. He's a pet of mine. If he's your pet, then why do you look so surprised? He usually avoids me when people are around, I explained. Doesn't like strangers, you see, but I guess he must like you. She carried on staring at me, wide-eyed, as I sat myself down on the nearest chair. But, she struggled for words. He is a squirrel, I finished for her. I have a knack for animals. Let's just leave it at that for now. I reached for a half-finished joint I left in the ashtray and lit up. Sit down, Tilly, I said, after taking a few drags. You're making me nervous. She claimed a seat opposite me. Nuttles, I thought, turning my eyes to him. Seeds, crunchy crunch, house tree climb. He jumped from my shoulder and scarpered towards the stairs. You spoke to him, Tilly exclaimed. No, I didn't. Technically, that wasn't a lie. My lips never moved. Yes, you did, Tilly smiled, almost triumphantly. Not with words, but maybe, not with words, but I could see something in your eyes. Maybe you're right, I admitted. But what of it? We all have secrets. I know that, Jack, she whispered. She turned her eyes to one of the walls wistfully, and I felt a twinge of guilt. I knew Tilly's secret. There was a long, slightly awkward pause, the sort which is often experienced when two people are on the cusp of becoming friends, when they're in that formative period where they are intrigued by each other but not yet comfortable. So I broke the silence and looked around the room for any forms of entertainment I might have stashed. I'm not used to having guests. Are you any good at chess? I asked. I don't know how to play, she admitted. You don't know how to play chess? I didn't even have friends until half a year ago. How would I? Grab that box over there, I'll teach you. She got the hang of the rules quickly, and she improved after a couple of games, but as is the way with chess, she didn't learn enough tactics to offer much of a challenge that first evening. After we got bored of playing, she had a good nose through my collection of books, and we discovered we both had passions for natural science and classical literature. That got the conversation rolling, awkwardness dissolved, and by the end of the night, Nuttles was curled up on Tilly's lap, and the two of us were telling each other childhood stories. When my eyelids began to feel heavy, I looked at the clock and discovered it was the early hours of the morning. I found her a sleeping bag and went to bed. In the morning, I walked down the stairs to find Tilly sitting at the table playing chess with herself. The narrow-eyed concentration which she carefully positioned one of the pieces on the new square, just before she carefully turned the board around to consider her counter-move, was quite charming to watch. Who's winning? I asked. She jumped at the sound of my voice, and a misplaced hand knocked the board over and sent the pieces showering across the carpet. I'm sorry, she squealed, and then bent down to gather them. I laughed. I'm the one who should be sorry, I said. I ruined your game. Stop it, I'll tidy up, I insist. Are you sure? She asked. Yes. I should go home, really, she said, reluctantly. My grandmother will be wondering where I am, but thank you, Jack, for letting me stay. No problem, I said, and then after a brief pause I found myself saying something else. You can come back whenever you want, you know, if you need to get away or just hang out. My door's always open, quite literally actually, it doesn't even have a lock. No one was more surprised than me by the fact that I actually meant that. I don't have many friends, well, not close ones. I'm quite a private person. I know lots of people, but I keep them at arm's distance. I'm not one to form tight bonds. I guess the reason I was letting Tilly into my life was that I was secretly lonely. I used to have the band and that took up a lot of my time, but Faye's sudden exodus left a huge rift. We did try to hold band practice last week, but Ellen was miserable and her heart just wasn't in it. I just didn't seem to work without Faye. When someone leaves a band, it's like a part of its soul is ripped away. Even if you replace them, it's never, for better or worse, quite the same. We decided to take a few weeks off so we could recover our spirits before we began the process of finding a new flautist. Since then, most of my evenings have been spent jamming in my living room alone with my guitar. I didn't realise until then that the band was really the only anchor in my life. Without it, I was adrift. I guess Tilly was the same. Faye had let her down too.